good for us either, you know? And it's not, right, Michelle? Or
Well,
is
it's
it too
just
much work for
hard.
you?
No, it's just hard trying to figure out who the hell to hire.
Okay, we're recording now. Okay, this is going to be your test. Number 1, 240 Q&A. Let me give you some proper names that come out. Mr. Long, HUD, HUD, Ted Birch, Birch, State of Texas, North Texas, East Texas, Central Texas, Jewel Manor, Prince Manor, Beth Ames, Mr. and Mrs. Rourke, Miss Ames, Exhibit number 1, Exhibit 1, Mr. Rourke's Professor Ross. And this is going to be at 240 words a minute. Q&A for 5 minutes. Starts in the middle. Mr. Long, how long has your dad been in the real estate business?
My whole life, just about that I remember. That's 64 years.
Okay, and are these apartments that you all own, do you have management contracts with any of them, or do you manage them yourself?
We self-manage.
All right, and are all of them HUD properties?
No, sir.
Okay, what percentage of, say, complexes are HUD units as opposed to non-HUD units?
Probably 85% are HUD units.
All right, and have you all been dealing with HUD units for a dozen years or more?
Correct.
Now, at the time that you bought this property, and I want to talk about who you bought them through.
Yes.
Was there a particular individual that you were dealing with?
A gentleman by the name of Ted Birch.
Okay, and is he a bankruptcy trustee, or is he a person that handles property out of bankruptcy?
He was the gentleman that represented the people that were in the bankruptcy to dispose of the properties for them through the bankruptcy court.
At or about the time that you had purchased these properties, were you buying other properties, though? Is it through
Birch.
Birch?
Yes, sir. About a number of properties, sir.
And about how many different apartment complexes did you all buy through this gentleman at or about the time that you were buying these two?
Probably about 10.
And were they scattered throughout the state of Texas?
Yes, sir.
And some of them in North Texas or East Texas?
Correct.
Some of them in Central Texas?
Correct.
And some of them down here?
Correct.
Were the Jewel Manor and Prince Manor among the biggest complexes you were buying, or were they among the smaller ones?
Smaller.
And of the 10 that you bought through this gentleman at or about the same time, how many of them did you sell?
2.
And those are the 2 that we're here in litigation about.
Correct.
Okay, and why did you decide to sell those?
They were just smaller complexes, and they were kind of bought within the package to keep everything going to buy more properties from the group.
Was it ever your intention to hang on to these smaller properties?
No, sir.
From a standpoint of self-managing apartment complexes, be they HUD or otherwise, is it more efficient if you're handling larger apartments?
Yes, sir.
And is that the reason why you decided to sell these?
Correct.
Now, you purchased these, I believe, the records show in May of 2006.
Okay.
And you got a contract for sale on them in August.
Correct.
So 3 months after you buy them, you got Beth Ames to sell them to Mr. and Mrs. Rourke.
Correct.
All right, and did you have anything to do with picking who was going to buy these projects?
No, sir.
Did you have any contact, written, telephonic, email, or any other way with Mr. or Mrs. Rourke before the sale or before the closing?
No, sir.
All right, now at the time that Ms. Ames starts putting together her packet, her prospectus there, exhibit number 1, did you have more than 3 months of data on what your expenses were or what your income was?
No, sir.
Okay, when you were buying these projects out of bankruptcy, did you get any audit reports?
No, sir.
Do you know when the last time these projects had been audited before you bought them?
No, sir.
At the time you bought them, were you required to prepare audits?
No, sir.
Did you subsequently have an audit prepared for the 10 months or 11 months that you owned this property?
Contract. When we went under contract, HUD had contacted me and said because of another change of ownership, now these were due to be audited before the sale could go through.
Okay, so when we see these numbers put up on the screen and these deals about audited 2006 income expenses, is that where they came from?
Correct.
Okay, and that was done after you all had the contract for sale.
Correct.
And this number of $100,000 loss has been bandied out the last day or two.
Yes.
Okay, do you understand where they're coming up with that figure?
Well, I assume from listening yesterday, some from the interest. And then there was an amount of money that we spent to get them all prepared to sell. I'm assuming that was what it is.
In looking at the exhibit 1, I think that's right in front of you, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
In terms of expenses, does it make any attempt to say what the expense for principal or interest payments would be on the mortgage?
No, sir.
Is that something that a broker trying to sell a property to Mr. Rourke is going to have a number for?
No, sir.
Is a person who's trying to sell the property to somebody like the Rourkes, are they going to know what the buyer's mortgage is going to be?
No, sir.
Are they going to know how much that person planned on paying cash or how much they're going to pay with a loan at the bank?
No, sir.
Okay, would it be impossible to put that figure in there?
Yes, sir.
And if you put in the figure, all you were paying for principal and interest during the months that you owned it would be misleading to a prospective buyer.
Correct.
Now, I think we heard some testimony yesterday from Professor Ross about $46,000 that you all paid towards you all's mortgage as a part of that $100,000. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes, sir.
All right. Do you disagree with that?
No, sir.
Okay. The other $54,000 of the balance, what was that spent on?
Expenses to get the property prepared for sale.
Well, first of all, were these properties well maintained at the time you bought them?
Some of them were, some of them, needed some help and some repair. I mean, they weren't in disarray or anything.
Typically, when you buy these properties out of bankruptcy, or do you expect that the people who are going through bankruptcy didn't spend as much money as they should be to keep the properties up?
Sure.
As a result of that, did you have to do some one-time expenses to get them up to snuff?
Correct.
Okay, and in your opinion, is that where the other $54,000 in additional expenses came from?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Long, did you all try to spruce up the properties before you sold them?
Yes, sir.
Is that a common practice when you're buying and selling real estate?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and Mr. Rourke, after any of his 3 inspections, came back to you and says, I'd like to get this done, or I'd like to get that done.
Never had any conversation with him.
Okay, did Beth Ames relay any information to you suggesting that the Rourkes wanted some items taken care of before they bought the property? And then we'll get ready for your 225 Q&As. On your 225 Q&A number 1, you have Mr. Torres, ST Gunite Construction, Roth Farms, Roth, Mrs. Yoder, Plaintiff's Exhibit A, Submember B, C, D, E, Mr. Cook, B1, B6, Plaintiff's Exhibits A and B, Exhibit A or B, Jody Gunite, E1, Plaintiff's Exhibit E1, Plaintiff's Exhibit A1, 813, Hal Robbins, Plaintiff's Exhibits A, B, and E, Exhibit C and D. And this is going to be 225 Q&A number 1 for 5 minutes, and it does start in the middle. Do you recall, did Mr. Torres have any questions about these billings at that time, the July billings?
I do not recall.
How did you review them with him?
I was there with the statement and the job cost ledger sheets, and as far as reviewing them, I handed them to him.
Do you recall preparing checks to individual suppliers for the month of July as submitted on the billings from ST Gunite Construction?
To individual suppliers only?
Yes.
No. They were joint checks to ST Gunite Construction and the supplier.
Why was this done in July? Was this the procedure usually followed throughout the billings during the construction?
No.
Why did you resort to this procedure only on the last billing?
I was instructed to by Mr. Torres.
Did you contact ST Gunite Construction about the July billing?
Did I contact them?
Yes.
No.
Is there any other bookkeeper for Roth Farms who reviewed these billings and cost statements in the fall of '85?
Not to my knowledge.
Would you know if there had been other bookkeepers for Roth Farms who reviewed these statements?
Yes.
Did you, on behalf of Roth, on your own, or because you were instructed to at any time, request that ST Gunite Construction change the billing procedure?
No.
Were there ever any questions raised by Mr. Torres during the fall of '85 as to the adequacy of the billing procedure?
He had questions about them. I don't know whether that falls into that particular category or not.
Was there ever any question about the nature or the format of the billing as presented to Roth Farms?
No, sir.
Now, Mrs. Yoder, you have been handed or have been asked to identify Plaintiff's Exhibit A with the sub-members 1 through 4, B, with sub-members 1 through 6, C, 1 through 7, D, 1 through 7, and E, 1 through 3. Is that correct?
Yes.
In each circumstance, Mr. Cook has asked you to identify these particular exhibits.
Yes.
And in each circumstance, you have identified the exhibit.
Yes.
Do you know for a fact, without comparing these particular exhibits with these contained in your files, that there are, in fact, the same pieces of paper that you do have in your files?
Not without comparing them.
You are making the assumption that these are, in fact, the same pieces of paper that you have in your files.
Yes.
And when I say the same, they are true and correct copies of what you have in your files.
Yes.
But you have not, at this point in time, made a comparison.
No.
Now, in looking at Plaintiff's Exhibit A1, Mr. Cook, during the course of his direct examination, has asked you to identify an entry in the estimate column listed as ST Gunite Construction with the corresponding entry in the labor column of $1,700. Do you recall being asked that particular question?
Yes,
And do you recall responding that you did in fact recognize that particular entry?
as salary.
Was this particular entry ever discussed by you with anybody from ST Gunite Construction Company during the month of August 1985?
No,
Was it discussed by you with anybody from ST Gunite Construction Inc. during the month of September 1985?
no, I don't believe so.
When was the first time that these particular entries were discussed with somebody from ST Gunite Construction Company?
I believe it was October of 85.
But are you certain that it was not discussed in August of 1985?
Not with myself.
And directing your attention to plaintiff's exhibit B1 through B6, I would ask again whether there were any specific discussions about the labor salary pertaining to ST Gunite Construction.
Not until the fall of 85.
So there was no discussion in August 1985?
No, not with me.
Did anybody from ST Gunite Construction Inc. during the month of August 1985 specifically print out to you that there was a labor entry here for ST Gunite Construction?
No,
Again, referring to plaintiff's exhibits A and B, you have testified previously in response to direct examination that there are certain entries on those two exhibits concerning items of overhead.
yes.
Do you recall when there was a specific discussion as to the exact breakdown of the entries concerning overhead?
I believe it was in October of 85.
Was there any discussion concerning the entries for overhead on either exhibit A or B during the month of August 1985?
No,
And what were the circumstances under which the terms of overhead as entered on exhibits A and B, what were the circumstances under which those were discussed?
Mr. Torres requested a breakdown from Jody Gunite as to how she arrived at these figures.
Did you call Jody Gunite and ask her for this breakdown?
Yes, I did.
And what did you receive?
I received this breakdown.
What are you referring to?
Well, this is the July billing as to how she,
What is the exhibit number there?
E1.
Were there breakdowns similar to that exhibit provided for the months other than July?
I believe there was. I really am not sure.
And was plaintiff's exhibit E1 provided at the request of yourself?
Yes,
Has anybody from ST Gunite Construction Inc. volunteered similar information prior to your request?
no,
Referring back to plaintiff's exhibits A and B, did you ever discuss with Mr. Torres the specific entries on any of the labor items?
not until he requested them in October.
Now, looking at plaintiff's exhibit A1, for example, do you see any entry here on what is listed as 8 through 13 for Hal Robbins in the amount of $89.50 for labor? Did you specifically discuss during the month of August that particular entry with Mr. Torres?
No,
Did you discuss any of the other labor during the month of August with Mr. Torres?
no,
Now, during the direct examination, you testified that plaintiff's exhibits A, B, and E had been questioned by Mr. Torres. Were you present when Mr. Torres reviewed them?
no, I provided Mr. Torres with these.
And so when you say that Mr. Torres did review these particular exhibits, that was speculation on your part.
Yes,
You did not actually see him review them.
no,
With regard to exhibits C and D, were you specifically present when Mr. Torres reviewed these particular items?
no,
So again, when you say Mr. Torres had reviewed exhibits C and D, it was speculation on your part. And then you have 225 Q&A number 2, Mrs. Blaine, Jan, Kent, Tampa, Florida, Winnipeg, Tampa, Kmart, Franklin Street, and Mr. Dietz. And this will be 225 Q&A number 2, and it starts in the middle for 5 minutes. Mrs. Blaine, you mentioned that in the spring of 1983, when Jan was on crutches and you went into detail as to all the bad things, did Jan complain to you?
no, she did not.
Did she complain to you in any of this large stack of letters of the terrible treatment that she was getting?
Occasionally, she would remark on things that happened down there, things that were said to her, things that had been said to her, things that had happened. She would occasionally write them down. She didn't write a great deal.
You have read those letters, and I sure don't want to go through the whole stack of letters, but isn't it true that the bulk of the complaints included in that stack of letters are complaints so far as Jan and her relationship to her mother-in-law?
The bulk of her complaints?
Yes.
No, I really and truly couldn't say that.
Whatever complaints, what I am trying to say, whatever complaints there are in these letters, do most of those complaints relate to bad things that Kent was doing or bad things that her mother-in-law was doing?
To tell the truth, I can't remember. I have read the letters just recently. Like you say, it is a large stack of letters. I can't remember everything that was in all of them.
In any event, following this visit in the spring of 1983, the next letter that she wrote to you didn't have any complaints about things that Kent was doing.
Apparently not.
You said you and Kent never had words together.
No, not that I can ever recall.
Did you ever tell Kent you thought he was doing things the wrong way so far as?
No, sir, wasn't my place.
So whatever terrible things were happening, they weren't so terrible that you felt called upon to bring it to anyone else's attention.
If I felt that my daughter was threatened with bodily harm, I would have done something, yes.
Now, Jan said they didn't have any problems with Kent's activities in the band.
As far as I know.
She never complained to you about the activities in the band?
No, sir, I don't believe so.
She never complained about the fact he was working too hard and had to stay away from home too much?
No,
Never complained about the fact that he was doing all that work?
no, she was quite proud.
As a matter of curiosity, what did she complain about? Why did this marriage break up, or do you know?
Jan did tell me a lot of things.
But you can't recall specifically right now?
I am trying. I really am. I'm sorry. Well, I am afraid you are going to have to ask her that.
You don't remember any specific complaints that Jan had when she came home?
Yes, I am sorry. I wish I could remember some of the things she told me.
All right, let's leave that. Jan lived with you for about a year.
Yes.
Tell me about the circumstances of her leaving your home.
Well, she just decided it was time for her to go out and make a life of her own.
And what kind of realistic plans did she have for going out and making a life of her own?
In what way?
Did you have any discussion with her about how she was going to get along?
She was on aid to dependent children.
She was on aid to dependent children.
Just before she left, she went on it as far as I can remember, and we offered to help her out if necessary.
And this was all right with you that she went off and lived on welfare?
I cannot say that it was completely all right with me. I thought that she should remain at home. We had been helping her. We had paid tuition at college, and while we were not well-to-do, we did the best we could.
Did she make any effort to be employed?
Yes, she did.
Was she employed?
No, she was not employed.
She went to Tampa, Florida?
Yes.
Who was she living with in Tampa, Florida?
As far as I knew, she and a man were living together.
As far as you knew?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever go and visit her?
No, I never did.
You never went to see her in Tampa, Florida?
No.
How long did she stay in Tampa, Florida?
Well, she went up there, I believe, about April or May, and she stayed that summer. And I believe she moved.
Your testimony is you never visited your daughter in her home.
No, I didn't.
Where did she go from there?
In the fall, last fall, I believe she moved in with some friends of hers.
You know the address?
The address? Winnipeg. Was that 453?
Isn't it true she had two different addresses before she got to Winnipeg?
I don't know.
You don't know.
As far as I knew, she lived in Tampa, Florida.
You really didn't know your daughter's whereabouts for months of the time from May until she got to, well, until just recently.
I didn't know. She always called me.
But you were telling me you didn't know she was in two other addresses.
Before,
Between the time she lived in Tampa and prior to the time she got to the Winnipeg address. Perhaps I should indicate to you your husband has previously testified there were two other addresses in between, and you are telling me you didn't know she had two other addresses in between.
no, I know she lived in Tampa, and then she moved in with friends of hers over by Kmart. Then she moved in with some other people.
Did she ever live with the couple for a while?
Yes.
That was in Winnipeg?
I am sorry, I can't remember.
Did you ever visit Jan at the Winnipeg address?
No.
How about the Franklin Street address?
That's right. I believe it was.
How long has she been living with Mr. Dietz?
Well, I learned she has apparently been living with him for about 10 months.
When did you first learn that?
When I spoke with another person.
That was the first time you learned she had been living with Mr. Dietz?
Yes, sir.
And that was when? Within the last 3 weeks?
Oh, yes, sir.
Did you and your daughter have an argument at the time she left your home to go off and live in the town of Tampa?
No, it really wasn't an argument. I would have preferred she stay at home, but she felt she just had to leave.
Okay, so that concludes your test, you all. Hopefully they're good enough to type up. Have a good day, and we'll reconvene tomorrow with lit speed building and a mock, okay?
I am confused on the weeks.